Oh, Raymond, are we still doing that thing at the end?
The books? Yeah,
Okay, forgot to ask you.
absolutely.
Thank you.
They actually arrive tomorrow, so I'll be just in time.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
That's
right.
great.
I got a UPS shipment, so.
Oh, good. And Dylan has the email addresses, so we can talk about that after. Sorry, I meant to mention that.
Yeah, sounds good.
Nancy gets the prize for being the first to join.
Gets the Steelers mug.
Oh, you're on mute, Nancy, if you're chatting with us.
Yeah, I said I came to hear my fearless leader speak, Raymond.
Awesome. Well, good to have you.
Thank you.
Raymond,
Nancy's in Denver, so she's neither a Pittsburgh or a
I love Denver.
Philadelphia fan.
What part of Denver?
Well, I'm definitely not a Pittsburgh fan if we're talking football. I'm from Cleveland.
Oh, Jesus. Nancy, you're disconnected as of this
Oh, no. Hey, somebody has to root for the Browns.
You're right.
Hey, they're doing pretty good this year.
Nancy, in what part of Denver do you live?
I'm just a little southwest of Denver, Denver proper, in a city called Littleton.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
just
so
on
nice.
the edge of the foothills.
Yeah.
I stay at the mile high level because if I go higher, I get horrible headaches.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Oh, it's nice. I worked for 2 companies, interestingly, back to back that were headquartered in Denver. So for, I don't know, 14 or 15 years, I went out there on a regular basis. And without fail, as soon as the plane starts to come down, I got the headache every time.
Yep.
Just never really got used to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it took a little bit to acclimate. I also lost 5 pounds of water weight when I got here, when I moved here, because it's
so dry.
Yes, that happened. Yeah, it's beautiful there. Beautiful.
It is. The only thing I don't like about it is when we get 8 feet of snow overnight. That's hard to manage.
Yes.
It is, and I have my patio is on the north side of my house, and it just becomes a skating rink if I don't keep up with getting the snow off. So overnight, as it's coming down, I'm out there every inch I'm taking off. So I don't get any sleep those nights.
It's interesting though, the difference between the snow there and the snow in the Northeast is, it doesn't sort of melt and then freeze over. So you're not really walking on a bed of snow underlaid by a bed of ice, right? It just sort of melts and then it's beautiful.
Only on streets that are north side where they don't get any sun. And
okay.
The backyard, it stays icy until June.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
All right, lots of people are joining. Welcome, everybody. We're going to wait a few minutes to get started, but good to see you.
There's my friend Dean.
Hey, Raymond.
I mean, I'm everyone's friend, but I see Freddie there as well. But
thanks for clarifying, Raymond. Thank you.
Yes.
Hello to all my friends.
There we go.
Starting to look like the Brady Bunch.
Mm-hmm.
On steroids.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining. We're going to give it another minute or two. People are still joining in. Good to have you.
Hi, Michael. I see Vicky all the time, but I just don't ever get to see you anymore.
How are you?
Doing fine. Doing fine.
I'm just riding her coattails at this point. That's why.
Anybody got a good joke? Shelley, you always have fun. Not nice.
It's about to overwear its welcome. I'm being careful.
I'll tell you guys, Shelly, you probably saw this on Facebook, but I have 7-year-old twin boys, and they attended their first funeral, and so we were talking all about, life and death and the different, things that happen in accordance with that. And a few days later, Jack looked at me, he goes, "You're going to be really sad when you read my will. It's going to say, Jack always wanted a guinea pig, was never allowed to get one." Like, well, that's not really a will.
Close enough. He was listening.
You're still not getting a guinea pig because I think they're absolutely disgusting, and I just cannot stomach having it in the house.
Mm-mm.
Oh my, that's so, when I was a kid, I had you just reminded me, I had a guinea pig named Freddie, but then it turns out that Freddie had babies, so Freddie became Frederica, and it was just a wonderful time.
Oh gosh, you lived in a very accepting household.
And life goes on today.
And life
I
goes
had
on.
hamsters named Donnie and Marie, and one night Donnie ate Marie. Very traumatic.
Wow.
Well, I'll
Really?
tell you, I posted this story on Facebook, and it confirmed my feelings that people will fight over anything, because there was some sort of little disagreement about guinea pigs between two of my friends. And then another one of my friends said, "Hey, I know where you can get a guinea pig, not in a pet store." And I'm like, I don't need an underground guinea pig. What is happening? I have to
Black
stop
market
using
guinea pig.
Yeah, I have to stop using Facebook.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining for the first time. If you're new to HR at Home, and if you are not, always great to have returning friends. It's a few minutes after, so why don't we go ahead and get started. I see a few folks calling in, but let's get started because we have lots of really good content and hopefully good discussion coming. Really happy to host HR at Home number 13. Of course, our objectives always remain the same. It's an opportunity for us to stay connected during quarantine and while we're not able to be together in various ways through, SHRE meetings or PSPS or other events. We're going to give, Keith Black is going to give us another legal update this week. We're going to talk about best practices, which I'll introduce our guests in a minute. And then, of course, beverages are always optional. This is HR at Home happy hour, after all. All right. With that, I'm going to turn over to Keith to talk about this week's top 3 legal issues.
Great, thanks, Shelley. We're going to go practical and timely this week. Normally, I wouldn't subject anybody to a discussion about the WARN Act intentionally, but it's relatively important right now. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the WARN Act, the Worker Adjustment Retraining and Notification Act, is a federal law that provides a requirement to give notice if you're going to do a plant closing or a mass layoff. We won't get into all the details, but it's typically 60 days. States have what they call mini WARN Act sometimes. So New Jersey has a 90-day provision, but the reason it's relevant right now is back when the pandemic started, back in the March-April timeframe, there was a lot of discussion about, do we need to give WARN Act notices if we're going to be laying off or closing? And there were 2 thoughts at the time. Number one, it's probably going to be temporary. What did we know? And the WARN Act says if it's temporary, less than 6 months, you don't have to do it. So everyone was relatively confident that 6 months from now, we wouldn't be worrying about this. We're now about 7 months into it, and we're obviously still worrying about it. So that becomes an issue. The second is that there's a defense called an unforeseen business circumstance, which gets you out of the requirements you have to give the notice. And it was relatively agreed upon, a consensus by experts at the time, that the pandemic was considered an unforeseen business circumstance. Now, 7 months later, having been through what we've been through, that's no longer the case. So this is just a kind of a heads up to take a look. If you've done layoffs, mass layoffs, plant closings, you can get into all the detail of what that means. But if you've done anything like that during this period, even if it was back in the March-April timeframe, let's say you were an entertainment concert venue and you laid everybody off because you thought for a couple months you wouldn't have concerts. Now it's 7 months later and you realize it's still not coming back for a long time. Probably want to give a WARN notice. So you might want to talk to counsel about that. Find out what your obligations are there, because you could be on the hook for 60 days or in New Jersey, 90 days of back pay and benefits for every employee who didn't properly get the appropriate notice. So that's the first one, just keep an eye on that and make sure you check that box if you're in the position of closing locations or laying off a number of people. The second one, we are just a few weeks away from the election. So a top issue on a lot of people's minds are, do we have to give employees time off to vote? And the answer is no. In Pennsylvania, New Jersey, or Delaware, the states do not require you to give employees time off to vote. Keep in mind, though, that if you're a multi-state operation or if you have employees in other states, that may not be the case, because a lot of states do require employers to provide voting leave if the employee cannot get to the polls due to work. Now, you might say, well, Pennsylvania, for example, they're open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So nobody's going to be working 12 hours, 13 hours. But the way the laws are written, generally, if you don't have a 3 or 4 hour consecutive window, either before work or after work, that means you don't have time to get to the polls and you have to give time off in those states. So for example, the state of New York, if you don't have a 4 consecutive hour window that the polls are open before or after work, you're required as an employer to give them up to 2 hours paid time off. So keep that in mind. Check the states that you're in. If anyone needs specific information, reach out to me. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. But obviously, even in the states where leave is not required, think about the right thing to do. It's certainly something we want to encourage our employees to do. So if your employees come to you and have an issue with being able to get off and vote, see about whether there's some kind of accommodation you might be able to make. And then the final thing has to do with the threshold for salaries for determining exempt or non-exempt status. As most of you know, and most of our managers seem to want to ignore, you don't just decide somebody gets a salary or somebody gets an hourly rate. That's determined by the Fair Labor Standards Act and state laws, which specify certain conditions, whether you're exempt from the law that allows you to be entitled to overtime pay. Now, forever, it seems, the federal standard has been a measly $455 a week, which is $23,600. Some of you may remember a few years back, it was 2016, when they were going to raise that to $47,000 and change. And we were all scrambling towards the end of the year to take a look at all of our employees that we had categorized as exempt, who were making under $47,000, to determine whether they really were or not. And then in December, a federal court in Texas said that the Department of Labor didn't have the authority to do that. And we went back to the $455 a week threshold. So 2 things here. Even if you're not in Pennsylvania, that has now gone up to $684 a week effective January 1st of 2020. So hopefully you know that. We're 10 months into it now. So anybody making under $35,000 and $568, there's going to be a presumption that they are non-exempt and entitled to overtime. But the important thing to note in Pennsylvania is, while we're now currently at that $684 a week, which is the same as federal, we've also built in escalations for 3 more years. So you'll see there on the chart, on the slide, starting in October of next year, that salary level, minimum salary, goes up to $40,000 and then $45,000. And then in October of 2023, there's a provision that it can be raised every 3rd year with only 90 days notice to employers. So just something to keep in mind in your budget planning, your salary compensation plans, and really make sure that you're classifying and categorizing people the right way. If you've got them classified as salary exempt and they're in that $35,000 to $45,000 range, you really want to keep an eye on that. So that's all I got for today. We'll pass it on to someone much better looking and much more interesting than me. We'll introduce Raymond.
Thank you. I thought you were talking about Raymond, but thank you.
I was talking about you, Kelly.
Any questions for Keith? Good stuff. All right. Well, then let's turn it over to two other very interesting people. It's a pleasure to have both Raymond Lee, whoops, sorry about that, Raymond Lee and Tracy Stough with us today. I want to tell you a little story about how I thought about, inviting Raymond to attend this call. So I know many of you on the call know that Raymond is a former president of PSPS and still very involved with that organization. Raymond's the CEO of a very, I would say, reputable and well-known outplacement firm here in the local area. They have a great reputation, as does Raymond himself. And I personally benefited from career transition services when I lost my job a couple of summers ago. So very thankful for that. And as we were thinking about topics, I thought about, as we approach Q4 of this year with pandemic and unfortunately businesses losing money and, potentially not only furloughing, but laying employees off, I thought about calling Raymond to say, geez, what kind of topic could we have for our community of friends? And he said, Shelley, nobody wants to talk about laying people off. And I said, Raymond, you're probably right, but I'm sure there's other interesting things we have to talk about that you have perspective on. So we kicked it around a little bit, and I'm excited to say that, I'll let Raymond share his special announcement about today, but Raymond has a really interesting story to tell about, four principles that we could use to lead not only ourselves through a career journey, but maybe others that we work with who might need to leave the organization or are thinking about leaving your organization because maybe your business is suffering. Or I think some people are having some awakenings these last 7 months going, is this really my life's purpose? What was more important to me? So, and then I'll let Raymond introduce Tracy, since they have a really nice relationship, which you'll learn about in a minute. But without further ado, Raymond, take it away.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you all so much for having Tracy and I here this afternoon. I appreciate the setup, by the way, in terms of what I do on my day job, so I won't have to, give my bio. And I see a lot of familiar names on the call today, and I got some nice chats. So thanks everyone for taking time out of probably a very busy day and having this HR at home chat. Yes, my good friend Tracy Stough and I go way back, and I invited Tracy, asked her to join this call today because she, like many people, has such a great story to share. And I think, and so I'm Tracy, thank you so much for joining. And I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. And then as Shelley mentioned, we're going to do this kind of fireside chat. And we're going to ask Tracy some questions around her journey. But if you want, Shelley, if you want to go to the next slide, that would be awesome. So as Shelley mentioned, yes, I didn't want to talk about layoffs, but the timing of these principles here, this framework was so timely because about a year ago, after a few years of going to the annual SHRM conference, and I had the fortunate pleasure of speaking at a couple of the annual events, I got a phone call from the SHRM publishing company in the summer of last year. And I guess I was on their radar screen. They said, hey, we've seen you present. We've been following your company, and we're interested to talk with you about possibly writing a book. And I almost just hung up the phone. Was like, wait a second, wait, who are you? And is this like the SHRM, or is this a spam or a robocall or whatever? And I just couldn't believe it. And so I took the drive down to DC and met with their publishing group. And, they were interested in me authoring a book around career transition. They said, you've been doing this for the last decade. You seem to be disrupting the space. And like Shelley said, I said, I really don't want to talk about outplacement. I don't want to talk about layoffs and transition, because it's not a topic people want to learn about. So I said, I want to think it over. And so what you're looking at here is this framework that I came up with. And I have to tell you, after, watching Simon Sinek and Brene Brown and all these fantastic thought leaders who have, a ton of research, they all have some kind of framework that they came up with, whether it's Simon and his golden circle. And so I thought about my journey, and I came up with these sort of four, principles: choice, mindset, and agility and trust. And when I grew up in the HR, I grew up in HR and worked in HR for about 15 years before starting CareerMinds. And it really starts with a choice. I think that, when we all look at our career journey, whether we're thinking about going into another role or applying for a promotion or starting a new business, there's a choice that has to be made. And I think back when I was working in an HR manager role for a chemical company in South Jersey. And I always had this desire to want to go out on my own and start my own business. And I knew that I had a really tough decision to make. I had spent my entire career in HR, and I had this dream of starting my own company. And it was incredibly scary. I was nervous about the idea of starting something new without obviously, knowing what the end could be. I actually went out and almost bought a franchise. Just because I was thinking about wanting to do a new business from the ground up, but for me that was incredibly risky. And so I was like, maybe I'll do a UPS store and do a franchise first, just to get some experience. So I had all of these like crazy thoughts going through my mind, but I had a heart-to-heart with my spouse, and she said, imagine yourself a year from now. Are you going to be like, do you see yourself shipping packages? And I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely, I don't see that at all. So that's the choice that I made. I decided not to do that. And I left corporate HR and I started CareerMinds in 2007, actually. And it led to mindset. And so I think about that day where I printed my business cards, and I went from HR manager to founder and CEO of CareerMinds. And literally, as I'm handing out these business cards, I'm thinking to myself, I don't think of myself as a CEO. I think of myself as an HR manager. And so for me, that next phase was mindset, and developing a growth mindset and recognizing that I'm going to be putting myself into a lot of uncomfortable situations where they're not going to feel, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to be insecure about my ability to really grow into the CEO role. So I started the business as a recruiting company in 2007. This was about 2 years before the recession. And we were actually doing pretty good. I had hired a couple of recruiters, and things were starting to seem like they were going well. And then all of a sudden the financial crisis came literally a year later. And that's where the agility came into play. And I had to make a serious pivot. We had a handful of clients. Thank goodness for Juno, we pivoted, because we'd be competitors right now. But we were very early into our journey. And to be honest with you, I wasn't incredibly, I wasn't motivated by recruiting personally. My background, I find a lot of satisfaction out of, helping people, transition, or helping people figure out what they want to do with their careers. And so it was actually one of the clients that I was recruiting for who called and said, they said, we're going bankrupt, and can you do outplacement? And it still gives me goosebumps today, because I wasn't, I didn't plan to be an outplacement company. We started well into 18 months as a recruiting firm. And that was sort of the light bulb that was very loud and clear that we had to pivot. And so we did that, and we started a virtual outplacement company in 2008. And so as I think about the next part of the journey that makes up the last, sort of principle, is trust. And when you think about, any startup or any decision that you make in your career, oftentimes you don't know what the outcome's going to be. And we actually share this a lot with our participants who are impacted by a reduction in force, because, it's very traumatic, and, you don't know what's going to be on the other side. And I'm sure, Shelley, if you shared your story, and Tracy's going to share hers here in just a bit, that you have to trust the process. And for me, not knowing the outcome, that pivot just became very apparent. And for me, it just gave me a much deeper sense of trust to know that, if I just continue to work hard and make the right decisions, you trust the process and things are going to fall into place. Some are intentional, and then sometimes you get a little bit of luck along the way. And so this is the framework that we came up with, and we've applied this across throughout many career transitions. And so what I want to do is ask Tracy. I want to transition here for a bit. And Shelley, by the way, how does it, in terms of like questions or comments, do people just post things? And
yeah, so thanks. I should have probably clarified at the beginning. You can either put a question in chat, which I or Dylan will get, or Vicky, and we can pipe in if you have a question, or you can just take yourself off mute and ask a question. So whatever people are comfortable with, feel free.
Okay, thank you for that. So yeah, so I'm gonna bring Tracy in just a second. And so this was sort of the concept behind the book, that it's actually called Clocking Out, and we'll share a little bit more about that later. And I'm going to give away a couple of books here. But Tracy, where are you? I don't see you.
I'm here.
Okay, there you are. So
I'm still here.
yes, so so thanks for joining, obviously. And when I was thinking about this framework, and Shelley had asked to invite someone on, I was like, you came top of mind, because, I think about these 4 principles, and you've really, just knowing your background and the journey you've been on, I feel like you've hit all of these. And I've, obviously have a story behind my background and how it relates, but why don't we just maybe have you tell a little bit about your background, and then lead it into what was your first significant choice that you made in your career?
Sure. Thank you. First of all, I just have to say how wonderful it is to see the faces of other HR professionals. It's been a long time. So, and certainly in COVID years, it feels like it's been 10 years since I've seen colleagues in the field. So thanks for having me. And Raymond, as always, thanks for thinking of me. When Raymond sent me probably a one-line email, hey, would you like to do this? He and I go, as he said, way back, and we've enjoyed a number of engagements together, including him dragging me to Disrupt HR, which I talked to Michael about earlier, and that's going to be something I'm going to talk about. But yeah, I love the framework. And honestly, as I was thinking about preparing for today, in this day and age, I almost, certainly they are career success principles, but I also think, my mindset around these ideas are that they're life skills, right? Because growing up in the 80s, and maybe I'm a lot older than all of you, but growing up in my career in the 80s, you kind of had an idea of what a career path looked like. And, you were an individual contributor, then you were a supervisor and a manager and a director and you might have changed companies once or twice, but it was kind of predictable, little bit, different than the environment, the economic environment, certainly in which we live today. And so, I really thought about these as life skills, and I thought about when I've made certain pivots or choices in my career or my life, about how and where I developed in each of these categories. So, perhaps, and we've talked about this a lot, perhaps the most significant choice I've made, it was jumping off the corporate merry-go-round. I had met Raymond probably 1.5, 2 years before that, when we made a change in our outplacement vendor from one of the usual suspects that I think a lot of you would know and maybe had used at one point, to CareerMinds. And what I loved about CareerMinds was just the innovation of the way the practice worked and what I could bring to employees. So we were operating in that capacity for a while. And the organization I was working for was one of the Blue Cross Blue Shield affiliates in Pittsburgh, my hometown. We were really approaching a tumultuous time in our existence as an organization. I was a senior leader, senior HR person for in charge of the HR for the insurance company. And we had other subsidiaries, but mine was insurance. And, we were in a very contentious battle with our largest competitor hospital system in our town. And it was just an interesting time, interesting place to do HR work. And I was leading a restructuring for the insurance company. We were doing some org design, leading a restructuring, and I had gotten a new boss about midway through this restructuring process. And I started to see my job evolving to, frankly, a lot less interesting place, right? It was kind of subtle, and it was, certainly something that, it was a space that both my boss and I liked to play in. And so, as he was the boss, he took greater and greater chunks of it. And so I was leading the restructuring, and I knew what my contract was. I knew what my out clause was. And I went to him one day when we were talking about HR's budget bogey, all right, what we were going to have to do to save money on the HR payroll. And I said, look, I want you to pick me. I want you to leave HR people aligned to the business and get rid of a layer of management. And, he was quite surprised that someone at my age, certainly, and my, sort of place in the company would make such a gesture. And for me, it just felt like it was the right time. I knew what the terms would be. I knew I had developed a great network in Pittsburgh, similar, professionals, HR professionals and companies that I had worked with throughout the years. And I felt like if there's ever going to be a time in my life that I could realize a dream, which for me was to go out on my own and to kind of start the pre-retirement phase by starting a consulting company, that this was going to be the time. And it was really going to be a huge time to, on executing my contract, is having some funding to do that, having some seed money to pay me, let's say, for a couple of years or 1.5 years until I got started. I knew what startup was going to look like. I knew how long it was going to take. So I thought it was a good time. And so, went about that. And as Raymond was doing our outplacement services for us, I also made arrangements to be able to use the outplacement services. As we all know, sometimes we say no when people have raised their hands, but my former boss was very gracious, and he was like, sure, you set it up, you have the right to use it. And so as Raymond and I started talking about what I wanted to do, which was not get another HR job in another company, but to do something different, we began jamming about what the possibilities were. And at that point in time, my mind was just like, I would say mindset was just blowing with all the possibilities, right? I could do this. And frankly, had a hard time narrowing it down. So Raymond was really helpful with that. And with respect to agility, I think that those two go hand in hand, is that if you think there's a lot of possibilities, the agility is to be able to flex and to be able to kind of go where the opportunity presents itself. You know, Raymond and I have talked a lot about how this generation has that agility mindset, right? They try a technology, and if it doesn't work, they try it again, and they try it a different way, and whatever. And I moved from a mindset of there's this specific way to go about things to, you got to try that. You got to try that. You got to move. You got to look for opportunities, and you got to grab them. So the people that you meet, the ideas that come across, you've got to be more probative, be more curious, and mentally agile to try those possibilities. And so I tried a lot of things as I was making my journey from sales to consulting to helping launch a product, right? So a marketing aspect. And it was great fun, and it was exhilarating for me at this point in my life. I was 50 years old, or 51 maybe, when I jumped off the merry-go-round, if you will. And it was an extremely energizing time in my life. And all throughout it, I trusted that it would turn out okay. I'm not sure why, but when I was leaving, one of my friends gave me a mug that the quote on the mug, and I still have it today, I meant to bring it in with me today, is, what would you do if you knew you wouldn't fail? What would you attempt if you knew you would not fail? And I just approached the challenge that way, is, I'm going to try this. I'm not going to fail. So, Raymond, many people, but Raymond and the team presented some opportunities for me that I thought, I'm crazy doing this, but something like Disrupt HR, I'm like, wow, that's such a different thing for me, but I'm going to try it. And it was big fun. So, so a lot of learning, and certainly fits right into these life skills, or career success principles that I believe are highlighted in the book.
So Tracy, first of all, I think everyone needs to know how nervous we were when your name came across that you were taking a package, by the way. I'm sorry, wait, who's using our service? Are you kidding me? No, she can't use our service. And so that was a very stressful moment. So I have to ask, digging into the mindset piece, what you went from running this HR function, this restructuring, to selling and marketing your services. Laurel Summit was your consulting company that you launched. How did you move? How did you move from that mindset of going from HR to sales and marketing, in terms of being willing to pick up the phone and say, just start smiling and dialing? And it wasn't necessarily cold calling, because you had a pretty robust network of friends that you've worked with throughout your career that, you could reach out to. But even then, you call your friends at Merck and you say, hey, I'm on my own and would love to talk with you about a project, and they never return your calls. And there was some,
you must have bumped your head.
Exactly. There were some moments where you're like, you second guessed yourself and was thinking like, did I really make the right decision here? And would love to hear your insights around that.
Yeah, sure. So, we're all used to a rhythm, right? We're used to a predictable rhythm. Gosh, in HR, we have these seasons every year. We do open enrollment next month. That's pretty predictable, right? And so when you go out on your own, you've got to create your own rhythm, right? And then you've got to understand how the rhythm works, right? So for me, that first year, and again, I thank God that I was being paid, because I wasn't generating much revenue. But that first year was about trying to understand the rhythm, right? And I didn't get that till I was in it. Like, when do people buy? When's the right time to approach them? How many times do you have to make that phone call? And, I was really fortunate. I think I had a lot of people that would pick up my phone call because they were interested, again, to see if I had like bumped my head or something while I was doing this. But just, really understanding that what you want to sell at that moment in time might not be anywhere near what they need to buy at that moment in time, right? And so really, it's just a lot more predictable when you're in an HR position in a company. You don't have to make that up yourself, or you don't have to realize what that rhythm is. I had to learn that. And so, yeah, there were a few times when I was like, okay, called everybody on my list. And I'm sitting there like, they either said, yeah, hey, that's great, not ready to buy, or I didn't hear, and I was like, am I nuts? Is this not going to work out? And so you really have to trust that there is a process, that there's a rhythm you're going to find, and you're going to get into that cycle. And I ended up getting this tremendous opportunity, and I am an HR person again, and certainly not at a very big place. There's a whole story around that, but I'm still getting people that call me 5 years later to say, hey, I'm ready to do this now, right? Are you still consulting? I'm ready to do this now. And I'm like, yeah, sure I am. And then I'm like, am I nuts? Like, I have a full-time job and a half. So, just getting used to the way things work, being less predictable and being open to that, and not giving up too quickly. You can't give up too quickly. You can't, I actually think that there were maybe some people out there going, she's not gonna stick with this, right? So I'm not gonna take a chance. But I was at it for about 3.5 years. So it was really good. I just called someone, or just reached out to someone yesterday who was in my network, and just really curious about what I was doing and what consulting I'm still doing, because he retired in the meantime, and shared some advice about taking on a consulting gig and what that would look like. So
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And you mentioned Juniata, that's where you are as the CHRO, and I think it's an interesting transition that you've gotten there, going from the position that you were in. You did your 3.5 years. Did you find that? So tell us about how that came about. I'm not gonna tell us how did you get to Juniata? I know that your son goes there, but why don't you share with the group?
My daughter said she knew I would follow him to college, but truth be known, this was my college first. So I'm an alum of Juniata College, and I've stayed active with Juniata. I've been on the board and stayed active as a class fund agent. And this place just has a wonderfully special place in my heart. And then, yes, it was a blessing that my son picked this school. So he's here as well as a senior. But I was at, my consulting business was finally starting to hum, and it was, it was good, and generating some revenue and so forth. And I got a medical diagnosis. I got diagnosed with a very slow growing form of breast cancer, which, is another thing that you have to have agility when you get bad news. And some of my friends were like, wow, that really sets you back. And honestly, I just had to manage it like another project on my desk, right? And again, I was very fortunate that it was a non-aggressive form, and I, went through my 22 rounds of radiation and whatnot. But as we all know, the Affordable Care Act was being challenged around that time, that it was not going to be there anymore. And, so all of a sudden, my husband has his own business too. All of a sudden, our ability to buy healthcare was going to be in question, and so we talked about it at home, about, whether one or the other of us should look to going back and, getting a job in a regular or a regular place, and getting benefits. But before we came to the conclusion about that, I was at a football game here at Juniata, and one of my friends said the HR director was retiring, and would I know anybody that might be interested? And so, as you might imagine, that 2-hour ride home with my husband was quite full of interesting challenges, because it meant a move for us. we had been, you know, out in Jersey. We moved to Pittsburgh, which was my hometown. We were there for about 8-9 years. We never stay anywhere very long. And this would have meant a move for our family for me to work at Juniata. And, you know, I love the place so much. I didn't really just take it for the benefits, and certainly not for the pay, because higher ed's not not known for its pay, but the ability to give back, and the ability to serve an institution that I've always loved and that I felt was really instrumental in making me who I am as a person and as a professional, was perhaps the most intriguing part of it. And, you know, I get to contribute in a lot of different ways here. I mean, the HR part of my job is a very typical HR job. It's got that rhythm to it. Certainly this year with COVID, I feel like I've had a career this year, you know, with COVID, but with all the changes. But I teach in the graduate program. I teach in the undergraduate program. I get to be a part of what we do. You know, I've worked in a lot of different companies, and, you know, they aren't going to hand you a test tube and let you, you know, do pharmaceuticals when you're the HR person in pharma. But I can be involved in the business of what we do here in, you know, changing students' lives, as well as my HR role. So it's really the best of all worlds for me. And just has been a lot of fun, and in a place I really love.
Tracy, how has this journey, this last journey of moving from your HR position to where you are now, the 3 years of experience that you had kind of figuring things out and developing a growth mindset and pivoting, that had to have really helped you in the role that you're in now, because you're sort of managing lots of different things. And I would imagine if you had just gone right from that insurance company right into the role, it would have been very different, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a great question. So, you know, really learning how to go after knowledge, you know, to invent, to create the pathway to influence. I mean, we're always selling as HR people, and it was never, you know, more apparent to me than when I went out and was trying to sell service, right? That you're influencing and selling on the inside all the time. You know, I don't know how much people, maybe some of you work in higher ed, but higher ed as an industry is changing significantly. There's not as many 18-year-olds to be had, and certainly the delivery of our delivery model for education is very much in transition. COVID has accelerated online learning. We're a small private liberal arts residential institution. And so big changes coming down the pike for us. And it's been really helpful for me to have that growth mindset and to help everyone from the senior leadership team, which I would characterize as pretty growth oriented, to the faculty, which really never had to think much about growth, right? The students came to the faculty because of their reputations and the liberal arts tradition, but really to try and influence how we need to think about our institution and our business model differently, how we need to think differently about higher ed. We had implemented some graduate programs online, and you know, we're kind of creeping into that space, but really being able to be instrumental in accelerating the graduate programs, filling a huge gap, a huge revenue gap in our long range plan. So I think if I had not gone out on my own, I wouldn't have that business mindset, that revenue growth mindset that I do. And I also developed quite a lot of confidence, you know, and that for me has been really helpful during COVID, because it's certainly there are a lot of employee implications during COVID, but there's a lot that most of us don't know, right? And so operating in the uncertainty of COVID, creating, I sit on the leadership team, the COVID leadership team, steering the organization's response, but also, you know, that's our response with students as well as with employees, our response to the community. Just being able to have that broad mindset and no fear about, well, let's not say no fear, but afraid to go to the grocery store, but you know, no real fear that we're going to make a terribly wrong decision. You know, we're in a tumultuous time. Nobody has the model of how to respond to COVID. And, you know, knock wood, the programs and processes that we put into place have allowed us to keep these students residential, you know, for going, well, we just finished up our 9th week. And, you know, that's been said that it couldn't be done, right? And we've kept our caseload low. You know, none of us had any experience with something like that, but I had experience with, you know, going out and just trying, right? Just trying something new, just, you know, having the trust that that it'll work out, the process will work out if you put the work into it. So I feel like that experience really gave me that, those muscles, right? And those skills.
That's great. So inspirational. Thanks for sharing. I wanted to turn things back over to Shelley. If you want to, we have about 12 minutes left here. Do you want to open it up for some questions?
Yeah. And I have a question, maybe Raymond, or a statement for you. And thank you, Tracy. Thank you for sharing such a personal story. And it's certainly been a pleasure talking to you these last couple of weeks. And by the way, you're welcome to join this group of HR professionals anytime you want. We do this every other Wednesday, as you know, so you can join us anytime. We'd love to have you back as a guest.
That would be awesome. I'll bring wine the next time.
Yeah. Yes. But Raymond, I was thinking about, you know, the visual that we have up, and I think you said it earlier, it's almost sort of life skills, or maybe it was Tracy, not just career success principles, but it almost seems to me like once you have a choice to be made, whether it's made for you, like you lose your job, or you choose to leave your job, or you choose to move, or whatever other choice you make, it's almost like mindset, agility, and trust are really interwoven. I feel like if you think about Tracy's story, she took an opportunity, started her own business, but just because her life has changed, you know, with her diagnosis and her husband having his own business, and heard this comment at a football game, like, our HR job is open, keep your ears open. It was like you use those 3 other skills, Tracy, or principles rather, to make a decision to say, should I pivot again? And I think a lot of people would think, well, I failed. Are people going to see me as a failure for not keeping my own business, when in fact, I just made a really smart decision that made a ton of sense for me and my family at the time. And I think as we help people through these career transitions as HR professionals or recruiters, I think we have to keep that in mind, that choosing to go from one place to another is not a failure, really. I think it's what's best for you. And maybe just for a moment in time in your life, maybe that's only 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's interesting that you said that, Shelley. And I think I learned that in sales, like in doing sales, right? Well, I don't remember if it was Raymond or who, but somebody said to me, how do you deal with all the rejection? And I'm like, wait, what? I'm being rejected? Like, you know, so my mindset was never, I was being rejected or I was failing, right? I just, you know, I refused to have that kind of a mindset. It was more like, well, the timing's just not right, right? So I do think that timing and a mindset of, you know, grasping opportunities because of timing or circumstances has to be a part of the plan. You know, and like, no, I see it as a failure. I'm like, oh, what? I'm being rejected? No.
Right. Well, that's your mindset, Tracy. Back to that point.
Tracy, would you say that part of that mindset is a perspective change, that, you know, kind of taking a step back from the corporate HR silo for a few years and seeing kind of a broader picture, and then getting back into HR gave you a more holistic view maybe of how HR fits into an organization and the value you could bring to it?
Yeah, I think that's true, Keith. You know, what I missed about HR when I was out on my own was, you know, I developed these solutions for people and they liked them and they paid me money to do them, but I was never a part of them then, right? Like I was, they carried on without me, hopefully implementing what I did and maybe calling me back every once in a while for advice, but feeling a part of something, an integral part of an organization probably was one of the things that I found that I missed. I didn't miss the politics and the climbing of the corporate ladder. So it wasn't like looking to go back into like a big organization at the time, because I just really wanted to contribute more locally, and be a part of the business. But it gave me the perspective to know the difference, right? It's that serenity prayer, the wisdom to know the difference, right? So yeah.
Right.
Other questions, comments? Feel free to type them in the chat, or you can just take yourself off mute. Hey.
I just have a comment to Tracy's point about, feeling bad, like about leaving a company that you started and then going into a different role internally. We talk to people as recruiters all the time who are making choices for various reasons in their life. And I know that earlier in my career, when my kids were really, really young, I made choices that people probably would have thought are not very ambitious, but it worked for that moment in my life. And so when I talk to candidates, I always talk about the reality of what's going on in their life right now and what's going to work for their career, because the reality is you can't put someone in a position or a role that doesn't work for their life. And so it's really important for people to be reflective and really take a reality check about what's going on in my life, and does this career choice make sense for me right now? Because ultimately you might think it's what you're supposed to do as you grow your career, but that doesn't really make sense for you personally. And so that's I think people need to do a little bit of self-reflection from time to time.
Shelley, Dean here, as I was looking at your model, Raymond, and listening to Tracy, it does occur to me, and Shelley really made this point, that choice piece really is an action, either an action that you're committing, or it's going to be committed on you. And it's something that I see that's really is going to repeat. It's going to be iterative throughout your model, because if you develop a growth mindset, you're going to at some point have to make a choice. The choices you make are going to be based on your mindset. In Tracy's case, you're saying that you saw opportunity where other people would see failure and rejection. That's a choice. And it just occurs to me that you're right. Mindset, agility, and trust are behaviors. Choice is an action that probably takes place multiple times throughout the process. It seems.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And, I think that the people I've seen struggle the most with, when they have to change, right, because the choice is taken away or whatever, are people that feel their choices are limited, right? They can only go to the next level job, or they can only work in this industry, or they can only work, or whatever, right? And so Raymond and I did some work about people retiring, and, just the mindset that people have to shift when they are no longer getting a lot of things from work, like status and pay and time management and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people don't feel they have choice. Right. And so part of our work is just building people's confidence around making the choice theirs. Right. And not letting that choice, be put upon them. Right. The funniest one we talk about is, what people, what they're going to do about other people in their lives. Right. Whether they're going to be, the caregiver of their grandchildren when they don't want to do that, right? Or they do want to do that, and how to go about that, but recognizing that that's their lever to pull, right, as individuals.
And I just thought this topic was so interesting, as we have a mix of, I'll call recruiters and then non-recruiters, so other HR professionals that don't recruit. We both have the ability to impact our organizations in different ways. To Vicki's point that she just eloquently made, how do you coach a candidate through making a change, whether you're proactively reaching out to hire someone, or they reach out to you because they're in a job search. And then the rest of us who are maybe helping people doing career coaching at an organization, or maybe through downsizing, or maybe helping the CEO think about how the last 7 months has changed his or her business, and how you help them think about the business opportunity for the future for the organization. I just think, again, Raymond, you should rename your book like Life Skills or something. I don't know, because these principles are really impactful for all the work that we all do as professionals within our respective areas of expertise, and how we can help coach others through that, and of course ourselves. I'm sure all of us are now thinking about, you know, your story, Tracy, going, yeah, I sort of did that, I think, but I didn't think about it in terms of these 4 steps. So I think we can all take a lot away from these 4 principles and become even more effective in helping those in our organizations that we work with.
Shelley, I think that was well said. And actually, when you mentioned the choice, sometimes when you don't have a choice, it feels like a victory. And how we can deal with the triggers that put your mindset a certain place, as opposed to giving them opportunities to recognize that, they do have choices. And of course, when you're less of a victim, your stress goes down. Folks are feeling very much victimized right now in many camps. So as a coach, you see that again and again. So I think this model works great. Tracy, thank you for sharing your story. I think it was very helpful, and I look forward to seeing and reading the book.
Thanks.
I will say this, that there's a personal side to the story as well that I haven't shared, that is kind of that will, you know, for those that do read the book, you'll read about it. It's a collection of stories, of life stories of people from birth to where they are today. And I kind of picked up where I left corporate HR, but, you know, choice does apply to life skills very much, whether, you depending on situations that you're in. And, you know, everyone has to make career choices, but you make personal choices as well. And Dean, I love honestly, I never thought about that. Choices in action and mindset, agility, and trust or behaviors. And I appreciate that insight, because, you know, you have choices, and not making a choice is a choice. Not doing anything is a choice. And so, so thanks for that.
Other comments?
So this is Cindy Porter. I'll say that I really appreciate this topic today, very timely for me, and this idea around choice, mindset, and trusting the process just really fits. So I recently made the decision to leave an organization I haven't been with for a real long time, but I saw clearly that organizational culture fit. It's just not the place I'm going to do my best work longer term. So, you know, earlier in my career, there were many times when I would have just powered through, or it would have been, oh, you have to stay somewhere a certain amount of time, or this or that. But no, and especially in the midst of a global pandemic, recession, et cetera, but there's just, you know, you get to a point where I think you do some of that inner work, and you know, at your core, you know, you do have a choice, and you know that things will happen and unfold as they're meant to be. So very, very timely topic for me. So I very much appreciate it.
Thank you,
That's
Cindy.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks,
That's
Cindy.
great. Other comments, questions?
I'll jump in.
Yeah. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, nice to see everyone. For me, it's really a convergence of kind of personal and work life. And I think, Tracy, hearing your story is really helpful for people, you know, for myself with my teenagers, and as well as a lot of the early career professionals that I do coach at our organization. So I think hearing those stories makes it easier. It's always easier to learn, you know, from someone else's experience, and not to have to go through the pain, but it really is their life skills that will help you. And I think when you're trying to figure out your career, you know, just thinking about it, breaking it down into choices that you're going to make is actually helps you psychologically be able to advance. Some people get paralyzed when they have to make decisions. And so just knowing that they're making a choice, that they're not, you know, you're not making a choice right now that's permanent in most situations. Sometimes it is, but so I think that's really helpful, you know, to keep that growth mindset in mind. Actually makes it easier to make choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Lisa.
Now, if someone could just convince my son that you don't have to have bad experiences to learn, I would appreciate that. You can learn through others because, you know.
Well, the good news, Tracy, is we can tell you where to get a great book where he can learn about that for
That's
himself.
right. It's going to be in his stocking.
That's right. Oh, that's funny. So I want to say Raymond was very gracious. He's offering us to give away 3 books for today. So we're going to figure out how to randomly draw some names out of the email registrations that we got. So we're going to do that just after the call. So thank you, Raymond, for that. And you'll get an email from either Dylan or I don't know who else. We'll figure this out after to send you an email saying you were the lucky person. And we'll ask for your address so that we can ship you a book. And Raymond, if one of our wonderful guests aren't one of the lucky 3, how can they get the book?
Amazon.com.
Simple enough. We all know how to do that.
It's on the Sherm bookstore as well, but you can buy it on Amazon. And I will just share really quickly the title "Clocking Out." Someone said life skills. We actually, when I started talking with Sherm, the book title was going to be "Change is Good." Was the initial suggestion, just because the whole idea of change and making a choice that you want to make a change is sort of like, that's what we tell everyone, change is good. And as we were interviewing one of the participants in their story, I said, so what was the big choice? And they said, I didn't have that opportunity. My company basically, one day I walked in and they told me to clock out. And I was like, oh my God, that's the book. That's the title. So I just thought, how cool is that it's either you're clocking out on your own terms, or maybe you're being forced to clock out, but it all leads with choice.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, thanks again, Raymond and Tracy. It was certainly great to have you. Appreciate you both sharing your personal stories. Thanks to everyone for joining, and we'll be in touch with the lucky 3 at some point today or tomorrow. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks,
good
Shelley.
to see you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Bye,
week.
everyone. Thanks,
Thanks for your
Tracy.
comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.